What's up, internet people? So I want to make this video regarding the fletching of wooden arrows. I'm currently completing a new set, and I have enough now for quite a while, so I was going to make a longer video regarding all of my experiences, observations, and note that I would like others to have if they're going to attempt something like this. The most crucial part about the whole process is, of course, the fletchings. Yes, it takes time to shape the arrow, introduce some trim into the back if the diameter is too large, trim the beginning and the end to fit the tips and the nock. Takes a little bit of woodworking, a lot of sanding, filing, and so on and so forth. All of these things can be done relatively easily, but really the fletchings is the part that's going to give you a lot of trouble if you're going to have any trouble. The main takeaway from this process that I would like to at least warn you about, and obviously I'm going to show what I do when I glue on the fletchings, and the gluing on is the important bit, is really that my first attempt at doing this, and there was 3 attempts unfortunately, is I used tape. And what I really want to warn you about is that tape is not an adequate solution when it comes to working with wooden shafts. Simply put, tape doesn't have enough glue, it doesn't have enough adhesion to a surface that is obviously not perfectly straight. It has microscopic dust, it has imperfections of all kinds, it has fingerprints, grease, oil from the actual skin, all kinds of stuff. The fletchings themselves are not perfect, unlike veins, which are made in a mold from rubberized plastic, whatever it is, artificial material. All of this, the feathers, the wood, none of it is ideally straight. Regardless of the fact that the profile is round, it is not perfectly straight. Especially these ones, since this is an 8.5mm shaft. The nocks themselves are 5/16 of an inch, which means 8mm exactly, 7.95, basically 8mm, which means that I had to introduce a small trim in the last 40% of the length of the arrow, right here, from this point towards the end, to not only fit the nock, but also to reduce the weight. So it took a little work, but in the end it was a win-win situation, because not only has this introduced a trim, it shifted more weight in the overall balance to the front, because I'm only using a 65 grain tip, which is not excessively light, but on the lighter side. And it also allowed me to fit the nock. And having an arrow that slightly tapers down towards the end is always generally good, right? So that alone, that process of filing it down, sanding it, will introduce even more irregularities in the surface of the wood. Using a tape to glue, or in this case to tape, the fletchings to the shaft is simply not adequate. So the first time I did this, I taped it on. I even videotaped it as a sort of a guide for others, like, here's how it is when, after about 10 arrows, how does it, is it easy or is it not easy for somebody who's doing this for the first time? And it was quite easy. It worked like a charm. But what I noticed after about 2 to 3 hours, the middle part was fine. But what happened is the ends, whether it's the forward part towards the tip or the back towards the nock, started to tape off, to glue off. Okay? And the more I waited, the more of the tip started to tape off. And it was clear that where there was a straight surface and where the clamp that was holding the actual fletching fitted properly onto the shaft, the connection was relatively good. Again, that was the problem. The tape either adheres to the surface quite well or quite badly. It's rarely in the middle. So it usually it's worse on the tips. And after about 2-3 hours, actually until the next morning, I would say that 50% of the tips, sometimes back, sometimes forward, would tape off. Some of the arrows I managed to fix, some not, but it was clear that tape is not an ideal solution for this. Again, if you have carbon arrows have extreme tolerances. It's an artificial material, it's made in a machine process, extremely accurately, it's extremely straight. If you're using vanes and not natural feathers with them, again, they're made in a mold. The tolerances are much higher. Tape might work, but and even if you are doing, even if you're taping feathers to wooden arrows and you have success, make no mistake, no matter how successful it is, it would be even better with glue. So this is the current one I have. I have 5, 2 more to go. 8.5 millimeters, I believe, and about 7.8, 7.9 right here at the knock, slightly tapered, as I said. Last 40% color, yellow colored. I have obviously a parabolic shape of the fletching themselves, a combination of olive green and yellow with this brown or khaki colored waxed thread. I recommend waxed thread because obviously the waxing protects the thread itself from moisture, from dirt and so on, so you don't have to sort of add any other lacquer or coatings on it to protect it. It sort of sticks to itself. Vermeil M-type knocks, definitely a way to go. Slightly more expensive, slightly, but definitely worth it. So the reason why I chose to use tape in the first place, and this might be the reason why you might be thinking right now to use tape, is glue, and I have just slightly left here, enough for 1 arrow, hopefully have more ready to go. It's here. The reason why I chose tape, because my assumption is that glue is going to be messy. Okay, most of my experiences working with glue is that it makes a mess. Okay, and especially here because you have a fletch, it goes, you know, into this clip, into a jig, it's a tiny surface, you have to sort of spread it, it's going to make a mess. A tape seemed like an easy, clean, and fast solution. In reality, here's what you need to take into consideration, and it will work fine. First of all, the glue that you're going to be using needs to be a gel form. Don't get me wrong, if you're going this in a completely traditional way, using stuff like, if you really want to bother with it, I don't think you should if these are your first arrows. But if you have a lot of experiences, okay, you know, you want to use like fish-based glue and so on, that's a whole different story. Like if you're gonna use that, you probably know what you're doing. At least when it comes to gluing, you might not have made an arrow before, but you know how to work with that glue. Okay, that's fine. If you don't have a lot of experience with this, but you want to make your arrows, you know how to work with wood and tools and so on, glue needs to be in a gel form. Now, this is Loctite Super Bond Power Flex Gel. Now, I initially hesitated from using this. I was referred to this by a friend who did archery much longer than I did, because I thought that glues like these have chemicals inside of them that would maybe corrode or eat through the finish. They don't. It was surprising to me that others much cheaper glues, for instance, I'm using Uhu for the knocks, works perfectly. Plastic, wood, metal, so on, works perfectly. This glue has a lot of acetone or something similar to that. If you put a glue like this on a acrylic based paint or lacquer, which this is, I'm using acrylic because, to be honestly, it's cheap, it's easy, and it doesn't have any odors or smells, so I can, you know, paint it and lacquer it indoors without having to, you know, ventilate the house for the entire day and still have a smell. It has almost no smell to it. It will eat right through it. This thing won't. Maybe it's, you know, a combination of factors, whatever. It doesn't. But it dries and it grips the material, adheres to the material extremely quickly. Like after just 10 seconds of pressure, it's done. It's gel based. There's no hassle. Don't use liquid, gel based. I use a simple toothpick to spread it on the base of the fletch, on the base of the feather, and that's all that it is. Okay, if you're just a little careful, not too careful, just a little careful, there's no mess whatsoever. Okay, the odor is, well, sort of, but it isn't that strong. You shouldn't be worried about it. And again, after just 10 seconds of pressure, it's done. And once this thing glues, once this dries, you can, this one's done, this one was over, I don't know, 10 minutes ago. You can take the feather and you can flail the arrow around. The feather might break, but it will not glue off. Okay? It is a much, much superior solution than tape. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, well, I've seen channels like the, what's it called, the Richard Head longbows, and they make traditional English middle-aged arrows, Western Europe middle-aged arrows, and they're using tape. Yes, they are, but they also whip the fletchings all throughout its length. Okay, once you do that, it doesn't really matter whether you use the good glue, a bad glue, a good tape, or a bad tape, to be perfectly honest, because you're going to be whipping with some thread, whatever the thread is, the entire length of the fletching. Okay, it doesn't matter even if you have a bad spot that wasn't glued on properly. The actual thread will keep it in place, and that's the whole point. Okay, so if you're gonna do that, then it doesn't really matter. Although I would advise you to immediately bind and whip the arrow with your thread, chosen thread, whatever it is, after you have glued on or taped on the feathers, for you not to allow them to glue off because of moisture, because of microscopic dust, whatever. Okay, so if you're gonna whip the fletchings all the way, it doesn't matter what you're gonna use. Glue, gel based. This Loctite Super Bond is extremely good with different kinds of finishes. Obviously, I believe that the acrylic based finish is the most sensitive one because it's based on water. So those are the three things you need to take into account, or four things. It dries fast, doesn't take more than 10-15 seconds of pressure to create a bond. It's gel, and the chemical composition of it will not interfere with whatever the kind of finish you're using. In my case, it's acrylic. You might be using something else. Just check it. And anyway, test it. So, I'm gonna put this away. Let's see how it's done. So, the first thing, I always like to put the arrow tip up high so it fits into the groove here, into the holder, so the gravity pulls it in. Make sure immediately that obviously the knocking side index is pointed up. Make sure that it's seated properly inside. You will check this again before you put the actual feather. And for each feather, right before you make contact, look and check that this thing is seated properly into the holder. Because if it isn't, you're gonna have a mess. You're gonna have to glue things off. It's gonna be a pain. Okay? Make sure it's there. Make sure it's even. Seated properly. Everything is aligned. I have this fletching jig. It's pretty okay. It can be adjusted in almost any way that a fletching jig can be adjusted. Whichever one you have, work with it. Like most fletching jigs, this one, this part of the clip is plastic. This one is metal. It has magnets here. So once you put it on, okay, you can feel the magnets gripping on. Regardless of this, I advise you to use your left hand's thumb and index finger to pinch, okay, right here. Pinch the clip to the jig so you don't have this sort of a rotation or yawing of the clip as it moves down and makes contact with the actual shaft. If you pinch it, again, nothing is done too strongly. You're not trying to sort of lift weights or anything. Just pinch it slightly, make sure it goes in perfectly, it's aligned, it goes in straight, everything's nice. Actually, I would advise you to use the thumb and the middle finger to pinch it and use the index to push the actual clip. So sorry about that, my mistake. The thumb and the index finger to push, to pinch, and the index finger to push down. On the other side, it's much simpler. Use your thumb and use the base of the index and the middle finger to slightly press the clip towards the shaft. Now, it is my experience and my recommendation not to simply push the clip towards the shaft. That will not be enough. As I said, these surfaces are not ideally straight. In most cases, only 95% of the length of the actual feather will adhere to the surface of the shaft properly. So it is my recommendation for you to, as I said, pinch, press, hold from the bottom, thumb of the right hand, base of the index and middle finger, and slightly press. I emphasize slightly, okay? You're not trying to press this like it's the last thing you're gonna do in your life. Slight pressure, okay? Whatever you try to pressure, whatever you try to squeeze, slow. Increase the pressure slow until you can feel that the surfaces are in contact with one another, and that's it, okay? It's in position. I want to have a yellow feather as my index one. We're gonna take 2 olive green ones. This one looks fine. Just make sure there are no defects, no differences in color or whatever, and anything beyond that, if you just like it or not, to be honest. Make sure you put the fletch in the proper position. That's why you have a ruler here. In my specific case, I'm going to put it just on the mark, slightly behind the 2/5 of the 1st inch. Again, test it, try it, see what works for you. I'm going to be using a thumb draw and a 3 fingers Mediterranean draw. These feathers, because they're parabolic, obviously they're very shallow at the beginning and at the back, which means that this can go slightly closer to the end, to the knock, than some other feathers, like have here some water drop shape ones. As you can see, there's just more feathers here. There's just more surface area. So if you put the fingers continuously up against, you might damage them. In this case, not so. I mean, even if you put the fingers here, you're just gonna press this part and that's it, okay? So in this case, I would make sure that this is maybe 2 to 3 millimeters slightly forward than this one, like 1/8 of an inch. See what works for you. If you're only gonna be using a Mediterranean draw, 3 fingers draw, you can obviously put it closer to the knock than, for instance, a thumb draw. Because when you hold it with a thumb draw, this index finger is slightly closer to the fletchings than than it would be if it's gripping like this, a 3 finger draw. I know from experience that this works for me. Put it in properly, make sure everything is aligned, it's right at the mark that I want, everything is seated perfectly, nothing sticks out, that's it. Take your glue. Again, don't worry too much. It's gel. It will not spill over as it would be if it were liquid. I have only a little bit remaining. I want to take full advantage of it all before I open up a new. And this is the good part. See, it will not flow like a liquid, but small droplets will come out. Basically, a droplet every 5 millimeters to 1 centimeters. sometimes closer than that. What you really want to make sure is that there's a lot of glue at the ends. That's where most of the pressure will be. But slow. Take your time. Okay, so what I have here is basically a bunch of droplets, and I'm going to use a simple toothpick to spread it. Again, no pressure, just barely touching, very slow. Again, I just want not so much as an even coating. Again, there should be more glue at the back and at the front, but I want at least some glue on every part of the surface, at least some. I don't want to have a place without any glue, that's for sure. Just gonna put a little bit at the front, just a little bit. I mean, I'm talking about just a droplet and nothing else. And that's it. Okay, again, pinch it, thumb and middle finger. Use the index finger to guide it down and press it. The back, make sure it's flush against the back. The magnet engages, make sure everything is aligned. Again, visually inspect that the arrow is in place. It's not off to the side, it is. Slowly down. Guide it slowly down. Okay, it made contact. Slight pressure and hold. Hold it for, I don't know, 15 seconds. Count it. Mississippi 1, Mississippi 2, Mississippi 3. Okay, right now, this is already far better of a connection that you're ever gonna make it with a tape. Okay, so again, make sure that everything was aligned. Once you take off the clip, don't just press it and take it off. You might introduce a sideways motion. Keep it pinched. Press it. Don't push it. Don't pull it. Press it directly up. As you pinch directly up and let loose of the pressure and just remove it. Inspect that everything is okay. This is the moment where you can correct slightly if any of the ends of the feathers were glued slightly off center, because that can happen. It usually will happen. Again, realign it, put some pressure to the side. 5 to 10 seconds of pressure is all that it takes. At this point you can simply remove it and just pinch the ends. Take your toothpick, there will be some glue on the side, and just smear it at the base of the feather, right the angle between the shaft and the feather. And what this will do is it will create a layer of glue in that angle. It will almost be like putting like plaster or whatever to keep it in place. Once it dries, it will be rigid, so it will keep it in place. Fine, it's in place. Rotate 120 degrees, put the new one. Make sure where's your mark. Flush against the jig, the clip. Looks good. Take the glue. Again, every 5 millimeters or so, a droplet. You're going to spread it with the toothpick. Again, it's just droplets that you're going to spread out evenly. That's it. Take your toothpick. Again, you just want the entire surface to have some glue, but you want slightly more at the very ends. Hold it. Arrow is in place, make sure. Clip is in place, magnet engages. Pinch it, guide it in, press it slightly, contact, hold it, Slight increase in pressure. What are you doing? She wants to learn how to do it. No. No more than 10 seconds. Yeah. That should be it. Pinch it, press, up and away. Inspect. Hey. Take your toothpick, smear the glue on the side, so when it dries up it'll form like a barrier that will keep the feather in place. And that's it. No need to remove it, just rotate it. Next position, final feather. What do you need? Good. Take your glue. Almost made a mess. Hey, shh. Okay. Take your toothpick. Just some piece of wood wherever you have. And just slightly more on the back. Really not working with me, cooperating that is. Okay, hold it, check the arrow, align it, in place, seat it at the back, pinch it, press it, guide it, make contact with the shaft, slightly increase the pressure, and hold. That should be it. Press the ends. That's it. Now, binding. There's no need to bind the back. It's just not under that much pressure as the front. The glue keeps it in place just fine. If you were to use tape, even with a carbon arrow, I would suggest binding the back. If your experience tells you differently, that's fine. The front, obviously, you need to. Before you do that, you need to make sure that, first of all, although most feathers, including these ones, are cut at an angle to create a sharp point, which is good, they will stick out from the shaft like this one. So what you need to do is use your nail of the thumb 90 degrees against the shaft and crush the base of the feather. So it's not only cut this way, but it tapers down towards the shaft. So once you put the thread for binding, it will slowly and gradually come up against or up on the base of the feather. So again, use your thumb, it's simple, and just crush the first, I don't know, 4 millimeters of it, no more than that. Now sometimes the feather is already cut or whatever, in a way that's sort of already done, but for instance in this case here it's not. It won't look good, it'll be messy, and to be perfectly honest, it will probably increase the drag, aerodynamic drag of the arrow. This part where it really is thick, I'm gonna use the base of these scissors, it's a hard metal, and just crush it. Slightly increase the pressure as I go down. Okay, that's it. That's done. Take your thread, whatever you want to use. There's no need to cut anything more than something like 60 centimeters. 2 feet. Even that is probably too much, but you know, just to make sure. The cleanest and the tidiest way of doing it is to prepare a tied up loop. Okay, it's just a loop. That's all that it is. Okay, you're gonna put this loop in the threads as you bind this thread, and once you have a leftover, you're gonna use this thread to pull it back throughout the rest of it and keep it in place. Now, put the thread on the shaft, the point going up, turn over the point to keep it in place. Pretty simple thing, no complications here. Over the sticking out thread to keep it in place. Use your finger to keep everything from not turning around, because before you add at least 3 turns, there simply isn't enough friction to keep everything in place. So this is the second turn, third turn, and that's it. Okay, now this you take, there we go, it's tight, there's no loose ends remaining. You put at least 3 turns over the end, and it's in place. You can cut the excess, you don't have to cut it flush, the remaining turns will cover it and keep it in place. That can never tie off. At this point, you can use your loop, put the loop against the existing turns of the thread, use one of your fingers to keep everything from unraveling, and continue turning the thread around the loop, over the loop, that is. I think it's pretty obvious. So the thread sticks out. Once you're left with whatever the length of the thread is remaining, you'll put it through the loop and pull the loop, and this will pull the thread inside the already existing turns of it, and will keep it in place. And this is the reason why we crushed the beginning of the base of the feathers, so the thread can gradually go up the base and not bunch up and create drag, and will simply not look good. Keep it tight, not too tight. You don't have to pull like it's the last thing you'll ever do. And actually, this is more than enough. You have the loop. I would advise you to pull the loop slightly so only a part of it sticks out. The reason for that is all of these are synthetic threads. If there's too much of it, it tends to curl up and create knots. So the less of it sticks out, it'll be cleaner. Put your thread through the loop, pull the loop, it's tight now, keep pulling the loop as it slides beneath the already existing turns. Starting to count, here we go. Once it's out, cut the piece remaining above. You don't want to keep pulling and pulling through the threads, it'll just potentially disturb the already existing turns. There's no need. If it's inside, it's inside. And that's it. Again, you need to inspect it after it's done. Make sure everything is okay, as I'm doing right now. There's no mess. Use a gel-based glue. Slightly careful. Take your time. And this will last you a long time. Okay, that's it.